Every now and then, technology intersects with society in a way that has profound importance and changes the course of human history. I think back to the 1400s, and if you were around in the 1400s, you were very likely going to be illiterate, right? You were literally and figuratively kept in the dark. And that was because knowledge was power, and the people that had knowledge and power was the institution of the church and the government, which was pretty much one and the same back then. So unless you knew a monk, you really didn't have any books, because the monks were the only ones that hand wrote and replicated every single piece of written word. 1440 comes along. Johannes Gutenberg creates the printing press. This is a game changer. This is the social media of the day back then. What it does is it absolutely takes away and makes highly efficient the process of creating books. So what do you see? Science takes off. Literacy explodes. The arts, everything. It's no secret then that many scholars point to this point in time as the beginning of the Renaissance. Now let's fast forward a little bit to current modern day. The social media that has swept the land has basically created a digital renaissance in our times. Think back to about 5 years ago. How did we as law enforcement get our word out? We wrote press releases, all right? And we hoped and prayed and crossed our fingers that the press release we sent to the newsroom was going to be written in a way and reported in a way that would be accurate, that would have the right context, and would actually be the right information. More often than not, that was not the case. So social media comes along and evens the playing field. It's no wonder that in the last few years, newspapers have gone out of business, major media companies have gone out of business and filed for bankruptcy, and it's because the same effect that the Gutenberg press had in really creating an environment where ideas, the common man, could put their word out, social media is doing the same. We now know that news breaks on Twitter, right? And the newsrooms follow up with that. So we are in this middle of this renaissance. You can even look around the world and point to points in time, governments and countries that have fallen, not because of social media, but certainly because social media became the conduit of information, and then you have old school governments and old school way of thinking, which, downplaying it, this isn't going to work, or it's not going to have an effect. Well, I think we can point to a few countries around the world where it does have that effect. The public knows this. The public does not compare our use of social media with each other, with other governments. You know where they get their standard? It's their interaction with the private sector. Now, let me give you a little story. Last year, I was trying to fly home from San Diego to San Jose, Southwest Airlines. 3 of my flights had already been canceled. So I, alongside with a whole bunch of passengers, are sitting in that terminal. Some are getting irate, some are getting stressed out. I'm on social media, so I'm kind of okay. I look at the gate, and I kind of want to go ask the gate agent, well, how long is this next delay going to be, and will I get on that next plane? The line for that gate agent stretches down the terminal. And then I remembered, you know what? I remember Southwest Airlines has this thing. They're supposed to be pretty good at social media, so let me tweet at them. And sure enough, I did. Hey, Southwest Airlines, stuck at San Diego, missed 3 flights already. Any information you can give me? Within 5 minutes, a message back on Twitter. Thanks for tweeting at us. We're sorry for your troubles. Please DM us, which is direct message us, your confirmation number. Sure enough, I switch it over to private, go to DM and say, hi, thanks again. Here's my confirmation number. 5 minutes later, we're really sorry, Mr. Hsiung, you're having that experience. The next flight in has more than enough room for you and the other passengers. Here's $50 for your troubles, right? Bang. Now take that story and understand that that is the bar that the public is setting all of us up to. Because what do? They had that great experience just like I did. They go to your government webpage. Hi, government so-and-so. I'd like to know whatever. Right? Crickets. Okay? We have to do better than that. We must do better than that, and the public demands it. You need to look at social media differently. It is not a tool. It is a digital community. The platforms allow you to get out there. Southwest understands this, which is why they have what's called a listening center. And that listening center is out there monitoring 24/7, and they try to get back to every customer within 15 minutes. Now, we don't have the budget or the time for that type of listening center, but it is important that we listen, all right? I like to go around when I teach, and I talk about social media, and that it's a language, and the platforms that are out there are different dialects. We police different communities. Now, imagine you just annexed a new community. That community is a digital world. They're there now. And right now, many departments, perhaps represented in this room, are neglecting that community. Pew Research tells us that 70% of Americans, and I think the number's higher, get their news and interact online through their smartphones. Are you reaching that community? Right? We live in an era where most neighbors don't know each other, but they interact with each other online on Nextdoor. That is a new digital beat we must be present in, and I'll show you why. So, let me give you an example of a case on how that looks. A couple years ago, we had a barricaded subject, all right? He was suicidal, ended up sitting on his driveway with a gun in his hand pointed at his head. Like many of you would know, this would be a typical call-out situation. We called out SWAT, we called out negotiators, we isolated the area, we contained and we evacuated, and we live-tweeted it, all right? We're very careful, especially being a former SWAT guy, we don't put out tactical information, but we do put out information that is relevant to the community. We're naive if we think that the community's not talking about it, because old school police press relations 101 is put up the crime scene tape, don't come in, we'll talk to you when it's done. So this incident lasted about 6 hours. Every 20, 30 minutes or so, we would put out a tidbit of information. Perhaps this street is closed, we're still talking. But even more importantly, we used every opportunity to message our intent. And what was our intent? To safely and patiently talk this guy out. We said it in different ways, we said it over and over again, so that at the end, no matter how it ended, no one could accuse us of going in there with an assassination intent, which is largely how the media in Hollywood likes to portray us, right? So this whole thing wraps up, he gives up, and I start to look at the comments online, and one gentleman in particular writes and says, I really wish your department was much like I wish other departments were like your department in that you were patient and you talked this guy out and used every tool possible. I'm really disappointed in the state of most police departments in the United States. My takeaway from that was, wait a minute, I've met a lot of police departments. I've met a lot of commanders. I've met a lot of street supervisors. I know they would have employed the exact same tactics we did. What was the difference? We talked about it, right? We messaged it. It's very important that you message. You can talk about certain things, just don't give up the tactics. But too many commanders, too many people in the command post are like, nope, don't put anything out. And if we end up having to take someone's life to save someone else's, you know who gets to write that narrative? The media, Hollywood, everybody with an agenda. It's absolutely it's important that you get in on that narrative. Let me tell you a little bit about Mountain View. So, Mountain View, California is kind of the heartbeat of Silicon Valley, right? I like to say we have a couple companies that you might have heard of, like Google. I can stand outside my office and watch these cars go by. We might have even been one of the first agencies to pull one of these cars over. To say that it is a tech-centric city is an understatement. So back when we started down the social media path in 2012, we went down the same road. I think the only difference looking back is that we employed almost a startup culture, which was test, fail, fail, test, hey, this works. Government, by and large, is really hesitant on failing. We don't have the luxury of time, especially in something like this. And we were okay, and I was okay, and more importantly, my chief was okay with us failing in little steps. And we learned along the way that, you know what, we started off blasting out information, treating social media like a fax machine, I like to say. And that's kind of a mistake, because we started out with pictures of just, feel good, and there's nothing inherently wrong with photos like this. But they don't always tell a story. There is so much more that can happen when we use photos that create conversation. And we started to understand that when we changed our voice and tone, magic happened. We developed relationships. Because online, we don't have the benefit of face-to-face. When I talk to you face-to-face, you're looking at my body language, you're looking at my voice inflection and listening. Online, you don't have that. And that is why it's so important to not only see social media as a language, but to also understand the dialects and to speak like a native. Because when you do, you engage something in the community. They see you as human. They see you as personable. This picture you see up here with the motor officer, the caption that might go with that might be, "Psst, hey, Mountain View, we're around the corner. Tell your friends," right? That's a very different message. It sends a lot of different messages in and of itself. This tells the community, we're not in it for revenue. We're at a school for safety, and we can kind of be a little funny and self-deprecating, and that's okay, right? Society needs to see that side of us. We don't show it often enough. In fact, we're largely silent, and guess who fills that void? Media, special interests, Hollywood. And that's not a very pretty void. So I encourage you, use these opportunities to create conversation. Use these opportunities. Consider yourself almost a cable channel that whatever you put out is so interesting online that your community wants to come to you because you're interesting. Don't be C-SPAN, all right? As government workers, you are all gifted with the ability to sound boring. But we all know, having worked in law enforcement, we work with some of the most hilarious people around. It's okay to show some of that side. So I want to segue in and explain that there are two sides of social media strategy. Part number one is when you engage these day-to-day pictures that you see. You develop these relationships online. It's magic, and you know it's magic when it happens because you go to a community event in person and you shake hands and you already know each other because you've interacted online, right? You are putting daily deposits in the bank of community trust because one day you may have to take a withdrawal. And you might have to take a withdrawal because of something an agency did next to you or across the country. It's a give and flow type of situation. Keep making these types of deposits. And when that community gets used to you messaging, when there's an earthquake, when there's a fire, they know to come to you as a source of trusted information, regardless of what the media is reporting. We've seen it time and time again. Even people tweet and they say they're tweeting at the media, unless Mountain View PD says it, I'm not going to believe it. That didn't happen overnight. That takes time. The other side of the equation is crisis communications. When that happens, sure, it's just like we do in real life. We drop the funny, ha-ha, personable, and that's the magic of social media. You all know how to do it already because we already do it in real life. What you would do in real life, you show up at a critical incident, you have your command presence, your command bearing, and you take charge of the situation, and you message, and it sounds like that. Outside of an incident, you're funny, haha officer, very personable, right? We do it every day in person. It should match that presence online. Now, what about negative comments? I've talked to so many chiefs and executives, they're afraid of negative comments. We see it differently. We see every negative comment as an opportunity to showcase our professionalism. And think about this. How many times have you worked on the streets and you've gotten a negative comment? What do? Do we go like this? I don't want to hear it. Sorry. I'm going to shut down the comment thread. I don't want to hear any negative comments. No. Someone gives us a negative comment on our Facebook page or tweets at us something negative. We'll write back and say, we're really sorry you had that experience. Please call us at this number. We want to know more. Because the takeaway there is that you are not just talking to that one individual. You may not even win them over. The big takeaway is on social media, you are talking to the silent majority who's watching this conversation. And if you don't say anything, they're going to walk away with the impression that, well, this agency doesn't care. They're not transparent, right? We always write back. And our time to be tested came when a couple years ago an officer was arrested. And this was going to come out into the news. And we had to figure out, what do we do with this? We ended up writing an open letter to the community. And we made it a commitment to write back everybody on all channels. And the messaging was consistent. We're just as deeply disappointed. We're going to cooperate with this investigation. And you know what the overall sentiment of the community was? They were angry. They were disappointed. But their comments came through and they said, but we still trust you. We took a withdrawal from that bank of community trust that day, but we came out with a healthy balance. And that's really important to do. So as I wrap it up, I recall back during the presidential election, the PBS news station Frontline ran a documentary about the contentious election cycle. And they basically titled it The Divided States of America. It's kind of heartbreaking to think about, but we do. We police divided communities. We protect a divided nation. And oftentimes, as law enforcement, we stand in the middle of that. And yet we're called to be friendly to both sides, fair to both sides. It's quite a balancing act. I attended a community meeting a couple months ago. They took a cross-section of the community. Every socioeconomic, race, ethnic, sexual orientation, they were there represented. The facilitator basically said, find someone in the room, pair up with someone you don't know and who doesn't look like you. You have 5 minutes to tell your story uninterrupted of how you got here from the day you were born to where you are now. So I listened, I sat down with someone that I didn't know, told my story, she told hers. The biggest takeaway out of all of that was that we're all humans. We've all been hurt. We've all had trials and tribulations. No matter outwardly what we might look like or what we might have gone through. The person I sat next to was a self-described hippie who protested in Berkeley in the 70s, right? And here I am, a police captain, talking to her. We both had the same conclusion, and when the group broke up into the bigger group, sure enough, everyone had the same conclusion. We all have different stories, but we're all human, and that brings us so much closer together. The facilitator ended with this quote, and it was extremely powerful. An enemy is one whose story we have not heard. Unfortunately, a lot of society sees us as the enemy. And unfortunately, if we're being honest, there are some in our industry that sees the public as the enemy. That has to change. And it's incumbent upon us, social media is a gift, to use that. We're in the middle of a renaissance, the perfect opportunity to tell our stories. If we remain silent, we're going to look back on the history books and say that we missed this gigantic opportunity to interact with the digital community that lives and by and large supports us. This is your opportunity now. Go tell your stories. Thank you.